video on mute because of the instability of the network on our side sometimes. And then at the end, I'll open it when we have questions and answers.
That's fine. So try to share the screen, see if it's allowing you to share the screen now. That's fine. Do you want to test if they can move forward?
You happy on your side?
Yeah, I'm happy. If you are happy.
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks.
That's fine. Then we may you may stop sharing so that we try this one.
Okay.
There is the program. I can share. Let me also. Yeah, they are moving. That's fine. So we are good to go. So wait up to 5 minutes too, and then we will start.
So yes, it's also along the radio. Okay, so when it stops, you can go there. Because right now it's ready, the road is done.
Oh.
So when it's ready to stop, you take it back.
Kindly mute Shanez. Shanez. There's someone who has the mic that's on.
So I have to give you some money before I. Okay, I named. I'm doing.
Thank you.
Ayan, I can see Professor Arthur and Professor Rajiv hasn't joined yet. Ayan, can you hear me?
Hello, Prophet Rasmus will be joining. He is actually logging in at the moment. So we'll start on the dot, and as I speak, you would have joined in. So Olwa is joining in, is logging in.
Okay, Ayan.
I'll just give a minute for Prof. Erasmus to finish logging in so that at least he will test his mic. Yeah, there is.
I can see Professor Rajiv has joined already.
Yes. Good morning, Prof. Erasmus.
Good morning.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So we can start whilst you catch your breath. I'll take this opportunity to welcome you all to this webinar on ethical laboratory practice being hosted by the University of Zimbabwe Department of Laboratory Diagnostic and Investigative Sciences, Cape Peninsula University of Technology Department of Biomedical Sciences, Stellenbosch University Division of Chemical Pathology, and University of some feedback. I'm not sure what. Oh, all right. Sorry about the feedback. Once again, I'll take it again. Sorry for the feedback that we have had. I'm welcoming to this webinar on the ethical laboratory practice being hosted by the University of Zimbabwe, Department of Laboratory Diagnostic and Investigative Sciences, Cape Peninsula University of Technology, Department of Biomedical Sciences, Stellenbosch University Division of Chemical Pathology, and the University of Pretoria Department of Chemical Pathology in collaboration with the Africa Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine and Empower School of Health. This is an effort to strengthen laboratory systems in Africa through the Africa Laboratory Systems Strengthening Initiative. And we have seen that we have similar issues that we face in Africa in the lab, and hence, if we augment all the resources that we have, human resource, and train each other, we'll be able to improve how we practice in the lab. So this is the first in the series of lectures or webinars from the Africa Laboratory System Strengthening this year. And to start us off, we will have Professor Rajiv Erasmus who will do the introduction. I will hand it over to Prof. Erasmus. Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues and friends across Africa. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to join you in this meeting. This is the first webinar, as Dr. Machingura mentioned, in a series of webinars that we will be holding throughout the year. The Africa Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Lab Medicine is indeed very proud to associate and collaborate with multiple universities and organizations in Africa, and in particular, Southern Africa. Our goal is to improve the quality of lab medicine in Africa, and we consist of nearly, I think at the moment, 15 associations from different countries in North, East, West, and Southern Africa. The pandemic has made us realize, or made everyone realize across the world, that without lab professionals, there is no practice and diagnosis of disease in the world. So there is no doubt that lab professionals are playing a critical role in the management of the health landscape. And indeed, without us, there is no practice and there is no medicine. However, we all know that ethics is critical for good practice and to ensure that the quality of results that the physicians use are of the utmost standard. So that's the reason that we are starting these series of lectures, with the first one being on ethics. So I do hope that you gain something from it, but most critically, what I would really want you to go back and do is to share the message with your colleagues and to ensure that we as lab professionals carry out the tests with the highest standard possible. So all the best and welcome once again to all the delegates. Over to you, Dr. Machingora.
Thank you very much, Prof. Erasmus. Our first presentation will be on ethics in laboratory medicine. And this talk will be given by Professor Arthur Mandisoza, who is an associate professor of hematology and blood transfusion science in the medical laboratory sciences unit in the Department of Laboratory Diagnostic and Investigative Sciences at the University of Zimbabwe. He is also a hematology consultant for the UCSF research project. And also to note that we have two related topics that will be presented on ethics. And if you have questions, you can type them in the chat box, or there will also be a time where we'll have a roundtable discussion where all the speakers and the resource people will be able to contribute to all the issues that are raised. So over to you, Prof. Mandisoza, who is taking us through the first presentation. Thank you.
Welcome, all ladies and gentlemen, to this very important day where we are going to be discussing ethics in laboratory medicine. My name is Professor Mandisoza from the University of Zimbabwe, Faculty of Health Sciences, Faculty of Medicine and the Health Sciences, Department of Laboratory Diagnostic and Investigative Science. Right. The issue of ethics is critical. It is often overlooked by many practitioners. Many practitioners, just bear with me. We are going to be going through the outline, which consists of about 6 topics: our introduction, code of ethics, standards and guidelines, our position, and talking in particular the Zimbabwean situation, and our conclusions. So we are looking at a very important topic because it has got a bearing on what we decide regarding diagnosis and patient management, okay, which are mainly based on outcomes and interpretation of laboratory test results. So medical laboratory diagnosis deals with many ethical issues, which we should not underestimate. These include the consent of the patient, confidentiality, the code of ethics, the conflict of interest, the proficiency testing, direct access testing, the so-called point of care testing, and how we can effectively utilize medical laboratories. These issues can cause problems if we do not carry them out. So it is important. They constitute an important aspect of ethical practice in the world. What is ethics in the first place? The general definition of ethics refers to moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the way he or she conducts his professional conduct or her professional activities. That's the general definition. But this one depends on the profession that is in person. So, good ethical conduct plays an important role in laboratory medicine practice. We need to do things right at all times. That is a must. So laboratory staff play a significant role in a good patient management outcomes. If we don't do things right in the lab, it means the patient is likely to be treated wrongly. So we play a very important role in the management of diseases. It is recommended that laboratory staff receive adequate training in aspects of ethics relevant to their profession. Currently, we do have some limitations. So, knowledge of ethics imparted on staff will in turn give us these results. It will give us, it will maintain confidentiality, increase operational integrity, impact capacity, the capabilities, and the impartiality, and also increasing safety of the staff. Impacts positively on the profession. If we do things right, if we carry out our ethical responsibilities well, then our profession will be respected. Those are other definitions and need for ethics. So we need to follow ethical practices as much as possible. I'm seeing this guy who is refusing to give information to the public. I think I like that. He is going the other direction. People want to know what is happening to their relative. See, he is saying, no. You can't give patient information to the public. I think that's a good one. The medical laboratory plays a vital role in disease diagnosis and treatment, as I've indicated before. In many countries and their professional bodies, there have been development of policies and guidelines pertaining to medical laboratory operations. After having seen some shortcomings, so their guidelines clearly outline the responsibilities of laboratory staff towards their profession, the patients, and the society at large. So based on those guidelines, other countries have done pretty well. Well, speaking for Zimbabwe and other developing countries, we still need to do a lot with regards to ethics. In other countries, these are the guidelines are in the form of ISO standards and codes of ethics. Codes of ethics are developed to guide us on how we should look at laboratory practice on ethical grounds. In general, we do have an ISO 9001 standard, which is meant for medical ethics in general. So we do have a section for laboratory ethics in that ISO standard. But what we need most is to develop a code of ethics, which is an expression of basic values and the principles by which some individuals or groups should conduct themselves. So we need to have that in writing so that we are guided on the way we should conduct ourselves in the profession. Most codes of ethics in laboratory medicine focus on one, consent from the patient, including those that involve unforeseen complications. We should make sure that the patient is aware of what is happening to him or her. We also need to consider the patient when we think of doing genetic testing. We also have to know how to report implications in accidental findings or disclosure errors. We need to disclose if there are some errors so that they can be corrected. We need to also appreciate and understand what the test is useful for. We need to know and make decisions. This can avoid doing tests that can cause patients unnecessarily. We also need to know how we can handle emerging disease settings. For example, during COVID-19 era, what is it that we should do? Right. Then direct consumer testing. What is it that we need to do when we are in that situation? In our context, we do have our standards. The Standards Association of Zimbabwe developed the ISO. That's all. The ISO 151/2003 version, specifically for our country. This is Zimbabwe. Okay? The ISO actually specifies the requirements for quality and competence in medical laboratories. The Annex C of the standard talks about ethics in laboratory medicine, covering the listed issues below. So we are saying in our context, in a Zimbabwean situation in particular, if we have something in place when it comes to ethics. However, there are some limitations in that standard, which means it has to be revised, taking into consideration various other aspects of ethics. We also have in place the national guidelines for laboratory, medical laboratories which was revised in 2010. That's the 2010 version. So the ethics is one of the requirements for medical laboratory management systems. And then this is the reason why this was put in place. On Appendix A on page 25 of those guidelines, requirements for ethics are stated. And those are the ones that are listed down there: staff maintenance of code of conduct, testing sites shall engage in lawful practices, fair patient treatment must be maintained, laboratories shall collect adequate information, giving patients the opportunity to decide his or her fate, and the others listed. Again, where are we in the context of our setting? This is the context of our setting in Zimbabwe. Maybe it applies to other countries in the developing world. I think there is no formal training on ethics, so we need to consolidate training on ethics as much as possible. Some medical laboratories have no evidence for good ethical practices. We need these documents to be in place in the form of code of ethics. Laboratory staff behavior and ethics or characters need to be improved on all aspects of ethics. I think we are talking from experiences that we have observed in the past several years of our experiences in the discipline of laboratory medicine. At times, laboratory staff do not put on their coats during testing times. Sometimes they are found busy phoning during testing times. The other times they have no proper dress up. You need to dress up properly as recommended by the profession. Sometimes we do not report the results if they are very abnormal. We just keep quiet and discuss patient results with strangers. These are just the observations. I'm not saying it's all. Sometimes we tend to be have these listed shortcomings. In conclusion, we are saying laboratory medicine is an important integral part of the healthcare system. Recent advances in laboratory testing have also increased contact between laboratory staff and the patient. So we have to know how best we can handle those situations. For example, again, point of care testing, how should we handle ourselves as professionals? There is need for training workshops in ethics for medical laboratory scientists. Professional and regulatory bodies must enforce maintenance of code of ethics as stipulated by in local guidelines. I think we do have these listed references. They are not limited. I think if we go by the internet, you can get as many pieces of information with regards to ethics as much as possible. But these are the 5 which I've listed among others. We are in the lab. I think This dressing may not be recommended in the lab because one, this can cause contamination. So we should be properly dressed in general, making sure that we are safe and also making sure that other people around us are safe. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mansoza, for that insightful presentation on ethics in laboratory medicine. It's such an important topic that we need to continue to remind ourselves to behave ethically so that we may preserve the profession and we may be able to save our population well. Our next presenter is Dr. Bettina Charlie Matsau, who is a senior lecturer and chemical pathologist in the Department of Chemical Pathology at the University of Pretoria and the National National Laboratory Service in South Africa. She will present on ethics in research ethics in laboratory medicine, consideration and challenges. And this is also an important issue as we now would want to be involved in research as medical laboratory professionals, but we also need to do it in an ethical manner. Dr. Matsau, may you share your screen?
Thank you, I will.
And please be reminded that if you have questions, you may post them in the chat box, or be ready to ask at the end of this next presentation. We'll have a chance to discuss over these issues, as these are pertinent issues that affect us as medical laboratory professionals. And we do need to continually discuss them and find ways of improving how we behave in the lab. Over to you, Dr. Charlie.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. As Ian said, I will be looking at the research ethics in laboratory medicine with primary focus on the considerations and challenges. This is the outline of my talk. I will first take you through a brief introduction, indicate you the history and the principles of ethics, and then we'll spend a lot of time looking at the ethical considerations and challenges. Then we'll finish up with the summary and conclusions. Now, research on humans and animals has a long-standing history. Actually, prior to World War II, there were no guidelines at all on ethical conduct when research involved human participants or even their material. This was actually one of the biggest problems and led to the development of what is known as Nuremberg Code of 1947. Most of you know that this code was actually introduced following the atrocities that many experiments were done. Really, people were forced to participate in experiments unwillingly, and this actually ended up with many people having severe comorbidities, some even dying as a result of these experiments. Following promulgation of this code, it led to other declarations. Now I want to talk about the Geneva Declaration because this was probably the first successful following the Nuremberg Code, because it drew some of the concepts from the Nuremberg Code and ultimately led to what we know today as the Declaration of Helsinki. This declaration has been around for a very long time. I think it's been revised for about 7 times now, with the most revision being done, I think, 2013. And I believe one of the revisions was actually done in our country, South Africa. The Declaration of Helsinki is the anchor on which all research on humans is based worldwide. Thus, in our case in laboratory, because we are also impacted by needing to follow this declaration, we are mandated by the ethical conduct of these. Some of these principles were touched by Prof. earlier, that include autonomy, whereby the rights of the patient or the participant, in the case of research, have to actually be respected. So this is expressed by the informed consent. We'll spend a lot of time on the informed consent because it's one of the biggest problems in laboratory research. Beneficence, whereby the obligation to act in the best interest of the participant or patient has to be respected. Non-maleficence, basically saying, please, no harm should be done to anybody. And of course, justice, which expresses the distributive justice and fair treatment. Now, I perceive the principles of ethics as actually being more like a three-pronged strategy. And of course, the respect for persons or participants being probably the most important anchor of the three prongs. Because if we are going to use people in research, we first need to respect them. And the respect for persons, this is where we are going to throw in the voluntary participation, informed consent, anonymity, confidentiality, respect, as well as also looking there is for harm. And of course, there's also justice and beneficence, as I've described in the earlier slide. Now, there are very important considerations when conducting research. The purpose, of course, is to protect the rights of participants. And in doing that, you will be able to ensure that the research validity is actually enhanced. And it is very important that we protect the integrity also of the institution where the research is based and the discipline in general. To be able to achieve this, we are mandated by the declaration I described earlier that each institution has to have a research ethics committee. These committees are mandated to ensure that research is conducted ethically. Each institution having this committee will ensure that the committee comprises of individuals coming from diverse fields to ensure that the expertise are actually balanced. In other words, you can have a person who's a natural scientist, medical, social scientist in the committee. You have clinicians. You'll also have someone who has got legal expertise. And this is important that when these people are looking at the protocol, they'll be able to address the issues in the protocol according to their expertise, if you may. Most journals actually will not publish any work at all that has not been evaluated or seen by the research committee. As far as I know, there have been very few studies already that have been retracted, not noting that there was a breach of ethical conduct. One of the known studies is the one that was withdrawn from Lancet last year that we all know about regarding COVID. The role of the ethics committee is to ensure that they go through the proposal protocols, they scrutinize them, and this is done prior to data collection. So they will ensure that the participants are protected. They're also referred to as subjects, mostly actually. Researchers have to take note of the potential risk and benefit regarding the study, and this have to be communicated to the participants. And also, it's important because this can also affect the next of kin, even their communities, and that informed consent is actually adequately addressed, and that the science that is described in the research is actually scientifically sound, and the integrity of the institution is actually protected. Therefore, the ultimate goal is to promote high ethical standards of research. They also look at the methodology that is described in the protocol, ensuring that the aims are very clear and the objectives are achievable, and that the planned sampling must be sound to address the research objectives. They look in detail at the methods, ensuring that the analytical tests or the assays considered should make sense and should be scientifically valid. They need to look at the pre-analytical, analytical, as well as the post-analytical issues, and all of these should be clearly indicated in the protocol. Therefore, the research committee, ethics committee, must have the expertise to be able to scrutinize the assays considered for the planned research. The laboratory, when it comes to research, is really a problem. because we have a lot of challenges with regard to what we need to meet as the ethical considerations. We'll be looking at most of these. I will not talk about commercial research, but I'll try as much as possible to touch on each of these aspects. Clinical laboratories are custodians of patient material. We have what we call tangible material. This is just referring to patient specimen, the actual physical specimen. It can be in the form of biological fluid, like blood samples, CSF, urine, or even tissue samples. These are usually kept in a biobank. We also have what we call intangible patient material. This is basically data that was previously collected. It may be from routine testing or from previous research. The data can be stored in the laboratory information system or can actually be stored as hard copies in stores. It's not unusual for researchers to go to the lab, ask for use of the existing patient material. The laboratory has a responsibility to safeguard against improper use of data or even specimen. We know of the recently promulgated POPI Act in South Africa that ensures that the personal information of all persons is protected. Research should not be in contravention of the international and national frameworks. Now, to address issues of confidentiality, most laboratories will have, if it's hard copies of biological samples, will be stored in, I'll just say lock and key, but basically saying that where the fridges are, there will be limited access and only few people should have access to the places. If there's any lock that has been tampered with or suspected of being tampered with, they should be reported. And so it's the case with these stores where hard copies are kept for data. Electronic data is protected. I think I was muted. Anyway, I don't know where I lost you.
Yeah, you are back.
Ian?
You can proceed.
Okay, that's fine. Then electronic data is protected by password, like I said, mixed character password to actually ensure the strength of the password. And this is changed regularly. And you require very few people to have access to this data. And of course, if there's any breach of or suspected compromise, there should be that reported to the authorities. Let's talk about stored data and leftover samples. Most samples are actually received following routine testing, for example. It can be samples that have been collected over time, or this can just be samples that are actually there because they are in excess, and these are mostly clinician ordered. As you know, that we pathologists and laboratory professionals in general do not really request patient material. Very rarely would do that. If we do, most of the time, we are working together with clinicians to obtain patient material. Leftover samples can be from a previous study, and the data generated can be from either of these. It is generally assumed or even expected that informed consent was received from patients at the time of the sample collection. In other words, we in the lab are assuming that when the patient was visiting casualty or was admitted, when the doctor said, we need to take UNE, check your renal function, the doctor asked for consent. But we know that usually this is assumed consent. Now, the issue here is that if consent was indeed obtained, it is likely that it was actually for that specific test. Therefore, these patients are not aware that their samples or even data will be used for research, whether it is for additional study or it is a brand new study altogether. I just want to describe what informed consent actually means. An individual has to make an independent decision. Autonomy has to be respected of the research participants, and each participant needs to understand the purpose of their research. They need to be given information inadequate to understand what the study is about, all the anticipated risks and potential benefits should be explained to participants. And they also have to understand how their confidentiality will be assured. And it is important that the participants know that they are doing this voluntarily. There should not be any coercion. So when you ask a person to participate in research, they should know that they're doing this because they would like to, but not because they have to. They should also know that they are free to withdraw anytime if they so wish. And there should be a process whereby they are able to withdraw, meaning that if the participants are in a research study, they should have a contact person so that if they decide at any one time, it doesn't matter what stage of the research is, they decide at any point they want to pull up, they should be able to do that. There are also issues with participants with limitations. These can be participants who have limited literacy. Therefore, in this case, the consent has to be clearly explained, verbally explained to the participant. And before they actually agree, there need to be a way to see that this patient really understands what the study is about. Some patients may have limited proficiency of the English language. In this case, there has to be a person who can translate to the participant in their language. And there's also a vulnerable group. These are usually children or the elderly who may not be able to sign on their own, or even those with mental issues, but it is really not encouraged to actually perform studies in the vulnerable group. But of course, such studies do happen. The samples that are stored in the biobank are usually kept for a very long time. Researchers usually, when they collect the sample, they actually may have intention to use the same sample for multiple studies. If researchers need to use a sample for an unrelated study or even a new investigation, it is unlikely that when the sample was collected, they actually consented to the new study because the study was not received anyway. Now, the issues here is if these samples are kept for a very long time, patients might have moved to a different place, their contact details might have changed, may not be reachable at all. There's also that group of patients who might have passed on since the samples were collected. It would be very difficult for the researchers to request of family members that their samples, they should consent for their samples. Really, that would be very cruel. These are some of the challenges that laboratory professionals face. Now, the issue is, should there be re-consenting if the samples were previously collected? Most countries actually permit the use of these samples without any additional consent, provided that the research involved no more than minimal risk to the patients, and it would be difficult to carry the research without a waiver of consent, and that the waiver of consent would not adversely affect the rights and welfare of the participant. Now, they usually state upfront that please make sure that the identifiers are removed. And this is a setting in most laboratory research, including our own. How are the identifiers removed? They can be done by one of the following ways. You can use codes whereby participants' personal information is removed and replaced by codes. Participant identifiers can actually be traced back. This is very useful if information or the results are to be communicated to the people at the end of the study. They can really reap the benefits of knowing what the outcome was. Also, if participants decide to withdraw in the middle of the study, it's very easy to know, to trace it back to know who actually wants to withdraw, because now you're using code to identify this. There are other ways like de-identification, where personal identifiers are removed altogether and not replaced by any codes at all. In this case, of course, you will not be able to trace back to the original source. Or you can also use what we call anonymized data, whereby during collection, there is no identifiable information that is being collected. And again, here, you cannot trace back. Now, the issues of the two processes, de-identification and anonymization, is that while the confidentiality is definitely ensured here, it will be difficult to provide these participants with feedback if the need is to provide them with feedback. And also, if these participants would like to withdraw, it will be difficult to know which samples have to be removed. Now, the issue of consent, as I've said, is really a problem. We have three, maybe more than three, but three specific ones that I'll be talking about today of types of consents. I've indicated already that biobank samples are very useful. They actually provide value in terms of really identifying or improving on the previously known conditions. We are able to find nuances and also to identify diseases that were not previously known. However, the regulations of patient consent are obviously strict, and there are variations between countries. And of course, when you think of collaborating between researchers collaborating from different countries, these are some of the hurdles that they are going to have. Mostly, informed consent is based on specific study, meaning that it is limited only for a single purpose. There are those who are supporting that if the study is not consented in this manner, then the sample or data should not be used at all. And biobank samples are available for a long time before the studies are even planned or conceptualized. Now, you can imagine how difficult it would be to be able to use biobank samples if this was the only route that we could use. There's also another measure, it's called boundaries consent. Though of those who are supporting this believe that if a set of researchers collects samples or data, and they decide that, for example, they are going to study diabetes, the study should only be based on diabetes. In other words, any angle that they are going to look at should be related to diabetes. They call the area of research should be the focus. In other words, if these researchers decide that, oh, you know what, we would like now to investigate cancer of some sort, for example, they cannot use those samples if the consent that was introduced here was the boundaries consent. And they also indicate here that if genetic studies are going to be done in this diabetes study, they should actually indicate upfront that this study is going to involve genetic studies. If they didn't, they cannot do that. Those in charge of the biobank must actually have a process in place to ensure that samples are only used for the purpose indicated upfront in the consent. There's another version that's supported by many. I think I also personally support this. To be able to use that material in biobank, we probably need what we call a blanket consent. This provides permission even for future research. And it is quite practical for material that are being stored. It has no restrictions, but it is very important that the respect for participants is actually known, it's protected. Donors should be given permission to withdraw their samples should they so wish. I just want to use this image to try to describe what I was trying to say in my previous couple of slides. On this pyramid, we have the specific consent right at the top, whereby participants will consent only for a specific study. Now, these patients or participants or subjects, as they're generally referred to, they have more autonomy because they are actually able to control, they have an idea of what's happening with their study. Then we have what I have described earlier as a broad consent or boundary consent. And we have also right at the bottom, blanket consent. Unfortunately, with regard to blanket consent, there's less autonomy. Actually, this is perceived by others as no consent at all. They see it as limiting, therefore they feel that it is not really a true consent. I just want to talk now about collaborative research. Now, it is ideal to have collaborative research. Actually, the best way to have success in research is to collaborate. Now, research shared between countries need to take into consideration that the legal frameworks of different countries will be different, as I've indicated in my opening slides. Now, it's important also to accommodate international collaborations in terms of the laws and that are governing the research, we have what we call soft laws and hard laws. I just want to explain quickly what I mean by this. Soft laws are basically guidelines, codes of conduct. They're not really binding, but they kind of give you an indication of how best to conduct your research. We also have hard laws. Hard laws are binding legal instruments like conventions, treaties, agreements, national statutory laws. And I must say that because the soft laws are generally not binding, most of the binding laws, hard laws, the acts and policies are actually drawn from the information that was obtained from the soft laws. Like the Declaration of Helsinki is not really binding. However, they are legal instruments that were drawn from this declaration. Therefore, you cannot ignore it. Otherwise, you won't be able to perform research at all. Review boards, as they are called in other countries, we refer to them as ethics committees on each side of the country, has to oversee that proper procedures are followed. This is when you think of people collaborating from different countries. And this is important because it needs to be established who does the data belong to, and was informed consent done properly, where the participants informed, and if secondary projects are to be considered, was that already indicated upfront, and also confidentiality, how it was ensured, was the coding procedure that was followed, how this was done. The complications here, however, will be, for instance, if participants would like to opt out. And also, it can be very difficult for multinational studies to be able to now go back to the donors to be able to share the results or the findings, if you may. Now, the right to know. It is really ideal that when the research is done, participants should benefit from the research by really knowing what the outcome was. This is addressed in the principles of beneficence and non-maleficence to the patient and, of course, to the others. If genetic testing has to be done, it is important that pre and post counseling is done. This is important because information from genetic testing will not only affect the participant, but may affect their immediate and extended family members. Researchers may find themselves in a dilemma on how to handle information. How do they now decide how to communicate this information? Because some of the information may be confusing and be really frustrating even to the researchers, because you want to provide information to people if they can do something about it. In other words, is the information clinically valid or is it actionable? Others believe that information should be given to the participants if they can do something about it. I just want to use this image to try to explain what I was trying to say in the previous image. Now, let's say, for example, research was done, and I'm going to use the box I have circled with purple and the red as examples in this case. Now, at the bottom, we have those research that would have really low clinical validity. And here you must think of the test that was done or the assay having specificity of a level. So if this research has got clinical validity, then we're going to assume that the sensitivity and specificity of these were actually reliable. So we can count on the outcome. When you look at the box at the bottom, you have a high number of SNPs. These are results associated with cancer in exploratory of genome-wide association studies that were done. Now, this information is not going to help the person who's going to receive it because there's very little they can do. The only thing they can do to them is just to cause them anxiety. You go to the one I circled with red. Your newborn child is unable to break down phenylalanine. Now, this is very useful information because it's got high clinical validity, and also it is actionable, meaning that the parent will be able to do something about it. So finding this kind of information having participated in research is actually very useful. Now, what happens when this research was done and the samples were completely anonymized? This would be a missed opportunity for the participants to have this useful information. And let's talk about publishing. Really, research has no value unless it's been published. In publishing their work, authors should avoid misrepresenting their findings and facts. Findings should be presented honestly and without any bias, because dishonesty and bias really undermine the usefulness of research publications. It's a waste of funds that could have been used for a better allocated elsewhere, really. It is also a waste of time for reviewers and journal editors. And it's important that while you have done your nice research and you're ready to prepare a manuscript, you should avoid sending your work to predatory journals, because those actually undermine your quality of your work that you put so much into. Let's talk about co-authorship. Who should be included as an author? There should be anyone who made substantial contribution. It can be a person who contributed in the conception and design of the study, or participated in acquisition of data, analysis thereof, interpretation of results, drafting of the article, or critically revising it and adding valuable intellectual content. The sequence of authors depend on the extent of contribution. Actually, most journals require authors to declare their contribution. Who should not be a co-author? If anyone helps to carry an equipment, or the agent, anyone who provides transportation, or the laptop is broken and someone is very generous and lets you use their laptop, a person who proofread your manuscript should not be in your part of the co-author. A senior person, line manager, who did not make any contribution to the research does not have to be a co-author. Authorship gifting is unethical. It serves no purpose, and it actually weakens the integrity of the research. These people, they have done valuable work. They've really assisted you to finish your research, but they should be included in the acknowledgement section. Intellectual property. IP rights allow individuals and organizations to earn recognition. Now we've seen that there's increase in collaborative research nationally and internationally. This we see also with the increase in the joint clinical trials, and now in the middle of COVID, these actually have escalated. Researchers sharing biospecimen and data. Unfortunately, this kind of work, while it's exciting, but it can potentially lead to conflict with respect to data ownership, and therefore creating problems and an embarrassment for both the researchers and their affiliated organizations. Therefore, it is very important that early in the planning of research, the participants in this research, the researchers themselves, that is, need to be able to establish who the data belongs to and how the results will be protected from exploitation, and should be able to establish how confidentiality measures will be ensured. And how will the joint ownership for expected jointly owned results will be handled? Another point that I need to mention here is that researchers should not use any material that can be method, data, figures, tables, anything you can think of, developed by others without permission or proper acknowledgement. Bias and conflict. This is also one of the common and really unethical issues that most researchers contend with. I just want to use these two examples here because there are different forms of bias. Funding bias, for example, it can be due to an influence from a funder. Let's say, for example, the investigators are working on the impact of diabetes on a population, but the study is funded by a sugar producing company. Now, we already know the results of the study before it's even started. Publication bias is when there's an influence from the reviewers, for example, or the editor. So the paper is submitted to the journal to which one of the co-authors reviewer its editor. Now, these are very difficult because you cannot avoid the journal reviewer, otherwise you find yourself being unable to publish. But these are some of the biases that we find ourselves contending with. Falsified reporting. Some researchers, out of desperation, may deliberately mislead their peers. Research misconduct involves making up or falsifying data, manipulating data analysis, or even misrepresenting results in research reports. These actions are committed intentionally and can actually have serious consequences. Research misconduct is regarded as academic fraud. Research misconduct is actually an ethical failure. It's embarrassing. It undermines scientific integrity and credibility of the institution where the researcher works. It's really a waste of time and funds that could have been used elsewhere. I personally believe it is safer to undersell your work than exaggerate it. Now let's talk about the further about this example. This is just something that most of us already know. Previously, early in the 60s, there was research that was very regarded as successful, was done by Harold Bates, who received his PhD. It was very successful. He did groundbreaking research in the lab of Professor Melvin Simpson, and this gentleman developed a method he did a study on biosynthesis of cytochrome C. It was published in the JBC, Journal of Biological Chemistry. It was regarded at the time as one of the most successful research studies. Bates then joined another lab, which was owned by the novelist Prof. Fritz Lippmann, who was excited to have this successful researcher in his lab, and Bates joined there as a postdoc. When he got to this lab, he developed another study. In his new study, he demonstrated the biosynthesis of glutathione, at this time using a completely different pathway that involved ribonucleic acids. Lippmann was very excited, and this work was also published in the JBC. Out of excitement, this Prof. Lippmann decided that I'm going to get another postdoc because I can use another peptide to be able to look into this glutathione model that Bates had shown to be so successful in. Unfortunately, this time, the results were negative. Lippmann got concerned, sent samples to different places, and this led to the testing of the original work that was published by Bates, which could not be confirmed. The repeat studies in Lippmann's lab and also in the other professor's lab of the cytochrome did not really show anything at all. It got these professors very worried, and eventually it was questioned by the journal. And of course, the two articles by Bates had to be retracted in 1961. Plagiarism is one of the problems, is when work done is not submitted as if it's your own, but most of the time, plagiarism is really done by inexperienced researchers. We see it quite commonly in students. It's really mostly not intentional. They really have no experience of putting together the scientific language, so they may actually find themselves repeating phrases of others. It is for this reason that most institutions encourage the use of detection software such as Turnitin, by which students can actually check the common phrases and statements prior to submission. Using someone else's work without proper acknowledgement or even credit is stealing. And they can also be self-plagiarism. This is intentional, it's deliberate. When an individual republishes or resubmits part of their already published work as if it's a new material altogether. And they do this without clearly citing the previously published work. Some researchers will just even take parts of the previous data that was collected and prepare this as if it's new. This is a problem because the researchers now want to benefit by presenting work as new from the originally published work. But this also infringes on the copyrights of the previous publisher. It is a waste of resource and really, and it's an embarrassment to the researchers and the affiliated institutions. Summary and conclusions. Informed consent may be very difficult to achieve, even to communicate when participants are vulnerable, like children, as I've said earlier, or the elderly, or those who have limited capacity to consent. Now we know that in our setting, whereby we would prefer to use large amount of data, as we know, with big data studies, it is not practical for being able to obtain an informed consent. It will be very difficult. It is for this reason that research ethics committees can assist us to really watchfully scrutinize what we're doing and be able to help us to demonstrate to them that we are going to protect the participants, while at the same time being able to perform research that can be beneficial to the participants and, of course, to the science. While it is very important to anonymize the data, it is probably better to use pseudonyms, that is codes. In this way, we are not only protecting the confidentiality of participants, but we are also giving them opportunity to be able to withdraw should they so wish, because if they contact the researchers to say, I don't want to participate, and we can check the sample back, we'll be able to remove it. And also, should they desire to receive feedback, we'll be able to provide them with feedback because we know where to go. Why do we need ethics in research? To ensure that participants are protected. This is, I must say, the most important reason for ethics. We need to uphold social and moral values that are really high, ensuring that we do no harm to others. Having ethics, it helps us to actually keep to the guidelines, and researchers are held accountable, therefore, to their actions, and this promote the value of research, and therefore increased expanding knowledge that we need so much in science. It's also important to support and promote collaborative work, and that it embraces mutual respect and fairness. Success and value of scientific research depends on successful collaboration between researchers. And also, when research is performed ethically, funders can actually trust our research, and it will actually encourage them to provide for future research, even for long-term research activities. I just want to acknowledge these organizations and universities for the opportunity that I have now to be able to talk to you. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bettina Chalematsau, for that interesting presentation. And we have had two presentations which were very good and insightful on ethics in lab medicine and ethics in research. And it's essential that we have quite some time to chat over this issue. That's why in this program, we deliberately left close to 20 minutes for interaction so that we can be able to talk through these issues, because these are real issues that we face daily in the lab, and we need to continue to improve how we work in an ethical way. And in my own opinion, before we go to the questions and the discussion forum, and as I also remind you, if you have a question, please type in or raise your hand. We'll be able to facilitate for you for the mic to be unmuted by the technical team so that you can also contribute. In my own words, the summary of it all is that you need to do to others as you would want them to do to you, even on your research samples or even in clinical practice. Whatever you do, it should be something that you are comfortable if it's done to you or your sample, and that when even if there is anyone watching, you will still be comfortable to continue what you are doing. And that way, we'll be able to practice good laboratory medicine. And a reminder that we are going to share the presentations, and you can also have a chance to log on to the Power School of Health website. This presentation will be available for later repeating or even playing back to colleagues in the lab who were not part of this live session, because this is important that we continue to remind each other on this. So I'll go to the questions that were raised. Okay, everybody, will the record of the session be available for all participants? Yes, I did answer that you will have access to the recording, and also you please feel free to log on and play for your colleagues in the lab, for the students, so that we may improve how we practice in the lab. That's the whole idea of this consortium from the universities and Africa Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Empower School of Health. What should we be doing to keep in check the rogue practitioners, billing patients and pocketing proceeds, issuing results, sometimes without even testing? Is involving the law enough? I will ask Professor Mandisoza to speak on this first, then Dr. Mtau would also add in. And over to you, Prof. Mandisoza. Can you respond to this one?
Well, I think it's a difficult question, but what I would say is once the lab is led by individuals who respect the patient in terms of ethics, that this thing should not occur. So that's why we are saying we need to emphasize training of ethics as much as possible. And we also need to monitor using professional bodies to make sure that such rogue practitioners are not given an opportunity to do what they want. I know it's very difficult, but with the time, I think you go over it. As long as you think about ethics as an individual and practice your practice, we should be able to overcome these problems. Thank you.
Dr. Matau, do you want to add anything on that one?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to say that laboratory professionals, because we do not work directly with patients, in our case, we expect that the clinicians would have really obtained consent from the patient. Now, if there's any potential harm to the patient, this would have been communicated. It's an expectation from us. I just want to mention something else also here, that Sydney, you will ask the question. And if, for example, you are working in the lab and you realize, I don't know how you would, but for some reason you find out that informed consent was not communicated to the patient, the laboratory professional has a right not to perform that test at all. But most of the time, that is something we are not going to find out. Most of us who've been really clinicians working in the face of a patient, we know that when you see a patient in casualty or in any setting, you wouldn't say, hi, ma'am, or say, I need to collect UNE for you. I'm going to prick you. I might actually damage your artery, but please sign here. We wouldn't do that. We would probably tell the patient why we want to collect the test, but we hardly ever request for informed consent in a way that is expected, the way the declaration is actually asking for it. Now, the issue with this is that it becomes a problem because the way the relationship between clinical lab and clinical medicine is such that we are actually having, as you said, contractual relationship with the clinical component, and we expect that they will do no harm to the patients. Every doctor knows that when you graduate, you actually make an oath. So your primary responsibility is your patient before anything else, before even yourself. So this is actually one of those ways that the agreement should actually be perceived, but nothing stops the professional, their professional, to intervene if you see that this is actually in harm's way of the patient. I don't know if I've answered your question adequately, Sabine.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mandisodza and Dr. Matsau. I just also want to add that we also as laboratory professionals have a moral obligation to whistleblow. If we see something happening that's not right, we need to whistleblow. And even if you are working in the lab that's involved in billing without carrying out the test or an unethical behavior, if you don't whistleblow and you continue to be part of it and doing that, you are also actually putting yourself in a situation where the law would need to take its course, because this is criminal. You are putting someone's life in danger. They are being given results which haven't been tested. And it's also fraud, claiming for what you haven't tested. So this is actually criminal, and we should take the responsibility in the lab to check on each other, and also alert the regulatory bodies if we note there is something that is happening that is not above board. And the regulatory bodies also need also to be empowered. We as lab professionals are the ones who empower our own bodies in our country, our regulatory bodies. We can also be able to ensure that they also are doing random checks on labs. And this is not to witch hunt, but it's also to safeguard the public. And if you are doing all things above board, you don't care when anyone comes in to see what you are doing in your practice. That will be my comment on that. So we go over. Dear Preksha, may you also share the presentations through our mails. Okay, we will organize that and we'll coordinate with the coordinating team to ensure that the presentations are available as well for those who would want them. Right, the colleagues were complimenting the presentation. If we speak of ethics in laboratory vis-a-vis clinical setup, how are the obligations passed on to the patient, given that most times we speak with the specimen, we deal with the specimen, not the patient? For example, the unforeseen effects or harm that need to be communicated to the patient. Are we then saying our requisition form need to contain such information as it is the only contractual agreement between the lab and the patient? Or are we saying we are having to train hospital nurses and doctors on the ethical issues and administer on the behalf of the lab? Or are we saying it's time the lab has to assume full ownership of the whole process of pre-test and post-testing? And if so, how then can we address the professional overlap? I will ask Prof. Mandisodza, Dr. Charlotte Matsau to respond first. Then Prof. Mandisodza can also respond on this one as well. Dr. Matsau, can you respond to this one?
With regard to, like I said in my previous description, it's it is very difficult for in our setting, the laboratory professionals, because of the relationship we have. If we are to now decide to take ownership of the informed consent, really to make sure that if patients are to be mistreated, we are on the forefront, it will be very difficult for labs to take that. But I agree with your comment you made earlier that if we see something, we should say something. But the truth is, many times this is not going to be, it's going to be hidden. We were not going to be able to see that easily. But we should not shy away from our participation in really protecting the welfare of the patients. How do we do that is a big question. And I think one of the participants also mentioned that maybe something about the forms, laboratory forms, should they have any information regarding the harm's way and the risk of harm's way of the test. I think it is going to be difficult for the laboratories to actually be able to intervene at that level, because you need to be able to communicate directly with the patient in this case. So I don't know. I just feel that we need probably have formats of discussion with clinicians where we can actually have some kind of understanding when it comes to no harming of the patient, or really fully communicating what the test is about. The issue that I find very complicated, and I just want to give you an example that happened in our lab. We received a stool sample that was destined for fecal elastase, I think, if I remember well, it's a couple of years back. But the technologists on the bench have formed fecal occult blood. It was positive. What do you do with those results? First of all, the clinician didn't ask for the test, meaning that the government, because we are a government setting, is not going to, you will not receive payment. That is going to be lost money. But now put money aside, talk about the patient, because our responsibility is for the patient. Although we would like to really be able to be paid for the services we provide, but our main responsibility is to ensure that our patients are treated with dignity and they receive that which is meant to be of their benefit. What would be needed in this case? Because obviously, if informed consent was requested for elastase, we know it wasn't for fecal occult blood because it wasn't requested in the first place. What I'm trying to do here is to show the dilemma that laboratory professionals finding themselves in when it comes to the really ethical conduct completely. It's really still a bit muddy. We still need really serious conversation with the clinicians with regard to all of this, including being able to report any errors on our part, being able to be determined about, let's say the test is run and we know that the controls failed, the results were released. If these results were indicating that the patient has got metabolic abnormality, let's say the calcium is on the roof, the past 20 patients, that is actually an error on our part because the controls have failed. This would be an unethical way reporting results that we know were not valid. I don't know if you are with me on the dilemmas that we have in terms of the laboratory component when it comes to ethically dealing with the issues regarding protecting patients and their well-being. I've taken too much. Let me be quiet and give Prof.
No, it's important that we discuss these issues, and you are very right to say sometimes in ethics in the lab, there is no right or a perfect answer, but you would do what is reasonable in the given circumstance. No wonder why sometimes, even when you are going in the court of law over issues that have transpired in the lab, you will be judged against what a reasonable laboratory practitioner would have done given that condition. So you are right. It's sometimes there are areas where we have to tread in the fine line. I would ask Professor Mansoza to say a word or two on that one before we go to the next one.
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge because one, when it comes to, let's say, sample collection from the person, it is very difficult to handle if there is a problem arising from that aspect. That's a good example. If there was a patient who wanted to have full blood count done, and the specimen was collected in a plain tube, which means it was meant for chemistry other than hematology. But the specimen went to hematology first, or maybe the clinician didn't know the exact type of tube which should be used. Sometimes in other countries, we have noticed the aspect of blood collection or sample collection in general is controlled or is done by the laboratory scientists because of these challenges. Because it's the laboratory scientists who knows which test is to be done, which tube to be used. And also, it can also increase the patient to laboratory scientist interaction, which is good. So I think it's still a problem. In other countries, as I said before, blood collection or sample collection in general is done by medical laboratory scientists. So maybe we really need to look at that aspect, see if we can also implement that approach to sample collection.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mandisoza and Dr. Matsau for that input. And also to add on to say that really the sample collection, even if it's not done by us as lab professionals, but we have an obligation to discuss or teach or mentor our colleagues who are involved in sample collection on these issues that are pertinent to the lab processing or lab testing, that is the consent process, or even the discussion on the potential harm that can happen in the sample collection or the process. And it's essential that if we are in a setting whereby one, we are just in a clinic setting in a non-teaching environment, we engage each other, but in a teaching environment, we also need to ensure that we also contribute to the teaching of the professionals that are involved in the collection of these samples, so that at least we also play our part in ensuring that these issues are also taught to the colleagues to ensure the consent process happens well. I see a hand from Dr. Sydney Chikukwa. Can the technical team kindly assist that we can unmute him and hear what he wants to say? Dr. Sydney Chikukwa, are you able to unmute? Can you unmute your mic? You have been given a right to speak. Kindly unmute your mic.
Yeah, I have done so.
Yes, please do speak, sir.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I really want us to maybe in future have thematic discussions on the issue of the practicality of the implementation of ethical issues in laboratory setup. Because many times we discuss about it, we know what it is, but when it comes to the actual implementation, which is what really matters, we really need to come to a position as a laboratory and say as a country, how are we going to implement these things? Because this is because discussing things without implementing them, it becomes rhetoric, and sometimes it doesn't help the very patient that we want to help. You see, we have been here on this session for 2 hours, and we must be able to go and invest these 2 hours in the patients. But if we don't have really the practicality, which is well defined and documented on how to implement this, it still remains a dilemma or a fiasco. Thank you so much for your time. And thank to Professor, my lecturer for a long time, since 1994, Prof. Mandisoda. Thank you. And Doctor, thank you for your contribution, Dr. Machingura.
Thank you for those comments. No wonder why we also did ensure that we had the long question and answer session, that we talk about the practicality, and we try to ensure that we included these practical issues when we are discussing the principles. If you saw the presentation that was done by Prof. Mandisoda and the one that was done by Dr. Matsau, they also did try to dwell also on the practicalities and also tease out the dilemmas that we face, because ethics usually does not have a right or a wrong answer. Other than CPD, shouldn't diagnostic laboratories or regulatory authorities now also introduce a requirement for evidence of good laboratory practice certification? I'm seeing I've gone over the time. I'll kindly ask that we can have we go over in the time in by about 10 to 15 minutes, so that we ensure that we deal with these issues that are pertinent, so that at least we discuss all. Please bear with me. I know we have gone over the time, but let's just address these issues, colleagues. So I'll ask Prof. Mandisoda to go first, and then Dr. Charlie to go, Matsau to go second on this. Other than CPDs, shouldn't diagnostic laboratories or regulatory authorities now also introduce a requirement for evidence of good laboratory practice certification?
Thank you for that question. I think one of my recommendations when I presented, I encourage, I say we need to relook at how the ethical conduct can be enforced by laboratory regulatory organization. I think that should be, it's a good thing to look at, instead of relying on one aspect of determining the practical or the practicality of a certain laboratory institution. We need to have that certificate. I think I totally agree with you. Good laboratory practice certificate can at least manage to handle some of the ethical challenges that we have. Thank you.
Dr. Matsau, can you add anything on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to the person who asked the question that the courses that everyone or people may wish to attend with regard to good laboratory practice are not necessarily meant for CPDs. CPD is an award to indicate that you actually participate. But the reason you attended the course is so that you can implement, so there can be a change in your practice. Like right now, we are here, so we are learning here together. And when we part, we should be able to implement an aspect of what we have learned here today. So I just wanted to indicate that it is actually not the case. But I agree with you in terms of needing probably to have even more platforms to find a way of actually assessing that all of us who work in the lab are actually following what we are supposed to be doing, because all of us, we know what we should be doing, except sometimes we forget, or for some reason, some may actually be left behind as we carry on. So definitely, I agree with you, we can find ways of improving, but we're not doing this for CPDs, but CPDs, it's almost like an award for the improvement that you have achieved.
Thank you very much for that. That sometimes, most of the times, people focus on the achievement and the piece of paper, but it's the knowledge that is gained and the issue that the knowledge that is gained is applied practically. And what other countries have done, actually, they've put together to say, these are issues that we want colleagues in the lab to continuously be reminded over. So in their requirement for ensuring that you are registered in each and every year, you must have acquired minimum CPD points in various issues that has to do with good laboratory practice. And the second issue is the other issue of ensuring that the agenda of ensuring that our labs in Africa are accredited is also an essential issue, because by being accredited, you would have followed the ISO 15189 standard, and you are instituting good laboratory practice in the way. So that's also an agenda, and that's why also us as the African Laboratory System Strengthening Initiative, we are trying to find ways of strengthening the labs and move towards these issues of accreditation, ensuring that good standards are being practiced in the lab anywhere in Africa, because anywhere in Africa we can find ourselves there, and we should feel safe when we are being tested, no matter it's not my lab in my country. That's what we want to institute. I'm going on further, and the links for further updates have been shared. Please take note of that. The links that were shared by Preksha. I once had an encounter where the doctor asked for lab equipment from the lab, HIV test kits and the micropipettes to test the patient who happened to be a colleague at the medical center. His argument was the lab does not have to know the HIV status of any colleagues at this medical center. So he should be the one performing all the HIV tests for all the colleagues. Is this proper or allowed? Dr. Matsau, can you respond first? Then Dr. Prof. Mansoza can also respond on that one.
Yeah, that's very strange. Anyway, obviously that does not allow it at all. But I know that clinicians, they tend to purchase their point of care equipment without even laboratory knowing. In our hospital, for example, we have point of care equipment across the hospital, but we are not looking after those point of cares. They are actually of the hospital. So remember that to actually be able to operate an instrument, even a tiny point of care, you need proper training. You need to make sure that the test that's being performed there is validated. You need to make sure that you're doing the controls, and ideally there should be at least some EQA of some sort on that. But even if the EQA is not possible, you should have a way to say that the test is run properly by a properly trained person. So we know that most clinicians, even private doctors, will purchase the point of care equipment, especially now in the middle of COVID. We see that really massively. But as laboratory professionals, we do believe that laboratory equipment should be the responsibility of laboratory professionals. So the answer to that question would be no.
Yeah. Oh, go on. I thought you had finished. You can go on, Dr. Charles.
I just wanted to say that question definitely would be a no, but nothing is stopping them, because if they go to the companies to request to purchase an equipment, they will be able to buy the little HIV field CT equipment, but definitely we cannot provide them with the laboratory equipment to say we are now going to place it in your office for you to test your colleagues, because we are not supposed to know what's going on. That is not how laboratory medicine works. I think many people do not understand laboratory medicine, really, how it works. Also wanted to say that what the doctor doesn't understand is that we are also bound by confidentiality, as Prof has indicated in his communication earlier. So even if we are to find out that the colleague has HIV, whatever condition that the patient may have, it would be unethical for us to disclose any results, whether it's low calcium, high calcium, to anybody. It doesn't matter whether the results are positive or negative. We are duty bound not to discuss any results with anyone except the requesting doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Matsao. Prof. Mansoza, do you want to say a word or two on that one?
Yeah, I think that's a typical case of a conflict of interest. You cannot test a member of your family. It has to be done by other people. So that doctor to me is not practicing accordingly. That's a crime. Because he is not trained to perform laboratory tests. So two, he is testing this friend for a disease which should be investigated by the laboratory. So I think that's a typical case of malpractice and the conflict of interest. It's not allowed to perform tests for friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Mansoza, and thank you, Dr. Matsao. And it's essential that we trust each other in the healthcare delivery. Each one plays their part. And even when there is point of care that's being introduced in the healthcare in the hospital, let's work together for the good of the patient at the end of the day. And let's trust each other as professionals, and that will help. The colleagues are complimenting the presentations, that they were very insightful, thanking both speakers for doing a good presentation. And it's also important, another colleague has pointed it right, that the ISO 15189 of 2012 is being updated. There will be a new version that will be announced and available soon. Yes, I was actually talking some time to a colleague who was working in that team that was updating the ISO 15189 standard. It will be out soon. And in Burkina Faso, we are still on ISO 1589 2012. And it's not being used by all labs, unfortunately. And we encourage labs to utilize them. And the only other way is to encourage the institution of standards, and through accreditation that can help. And the presentations were acknowledged. one issue of patient consent, I have seen some labs which have included that part on their request form. So I think we can all implement that as labs and also engage the other colleagues involved in the collection of blood, and that will help. So we can also try to explore this and see if this issue was dealt with by the team. I will not ask them to comment again on this. They commented on that issue. I like to ask this. Let's say, for instance, you are running some samples and your QC fails. What are you supposed to do to resolve this challenge? Secondly, what is the best shot in carrying out internal audit? I'll ask Prof. Mansoza to say a word or two on this one, and Dr. Matsao to, let's say, for instance, you are running some samples and your QC fails. What are you supposed to do to resolve this challenge? And the best shot in carrying out internal audit.
A QC symbol or quality control symbol is a symbol that is run together with your patient specimen. Once your QC symbol is out of control, or that is outside the expected range, you stop there. Then you determine what could have gone wrong. Is your QC sample that you are using not expired? So all these things you need to check. You repeat, find out if it gives you an abnormal result again. If it does, we recommend that those results are not reported at all. All the time, if the QC sample is abnormal, we don't report the results until we have resolved the problem. Second one is what is the best shot in carrying out internal audit? That's part of the internal audit. I think always run your samples with a quality control, or do a quality control with all your samples from time to time. You don't run patient samples without an internal control. So that is a requirement.
Thank you, Prof. Mansoza. Dr. Matsao, do you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I expect every lab would have a process, an SOP that's going to guide the person working on the bench on how to troubleshoot failed QC. It should be standard. That should be the first thing that every person working in the lab should know, because there are various levels at which the intervention might be needed. Prof has described some of these things. Now, first of all, you need to be able to describe what the event is, what actually has failed. So are you saying there is a systematic error, or are you saying you suspect the random error, but how are you going to identify that? Based on what your QC failure is telling you, you need to be able to exclude whether the problem is, let's say in our lab with 2 analyzers. So you first want to see whether the problem is confined to the single analyzer or it's affecting both. So it's actually a process whereby you have to really tease out each and every one of the problem until you get to the root of the problem. And I would suggest that you look into your lab's process of troubleshooting QCs. It's everyone who works in the lab has to know how that is to be done. It's very, very important. You cannot release the results of the failed QC. So the important thing here is that if you work in a lab and you don't know how to troubleshoot failed QC, that lab is in big trouble. The second part of your question is regarding internal audits. I always say to my colleagues here that the internal audits should be perceived as, like all of us here, on daily basis, your home is cleaned. You don't clean your home on the day when the visitors are coming. And the visitors are actually the external auditors, like when we in South Africa have SANAs coming. But if we try to really place like regular checks, we can have, depending on how the resources, availability of the resources, because you may not have a person to actually be able to assist with that on a regular basis. But let's say it's every 4 months, depending on the resources of the lab. Even twice a year is still fine, but it must be as regular as possible. And the reason is so that there's literally the eye watching what is happening in the lab on all aspects, so that when we are being evaluated in the following year, no one is going to spend hours on end trying to prepare for SANAs. We should not be preparing for accreditation. We should actually be always ready, and we'll only be ready if we keep on self-checking, and we can do self-checking if we do regular internal audits. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Dr. Matsao and Prof. Mansoza. It does, and that adds on to the issue of saying, ensuring that we are working according to standards, and hence even the standard, the ISO 15189. If we are utilizing it, it will ensure that we have all these SOPs and we have all these processes, and these are checked by your internal audit, so that you are always ready for even when you have a planned annual check by the accrediting body or a random check. And if possible, have a quality manager and internal auditor in your lab, a person dedicated, or a person can have dual responsibilities. This is important for the good of your processes, so that you are doing the right thing all the time. And there is always someone who is checking out whether we are doing the right thing, so that things don't just slip out of the way and we realize it when it's too late. So it's good that we do have that check. And another request is for a webinar on safety that will be that has been noted. Or to please look in the issue of the mic of Prof is inaudible. Our apologies. I think maybe we ensure that we try to resolve that. Thanks for the eye-opener lecture. Kudos for the two presenters. Please, what is the answer to the question asked on HIV test kits that a doctor requested for? It was indicated that this is an unethical practice. They should know that we are all professionals in our own right. If they want to do point of care testing, it should be standard in the hospital setting, and it should be supported by the lab to ensure that the patients are treated well. And if they are worried about the issues of confidentiality of the results, the lab professionals, we are also professionals. We do ensure that we have confidentiality in all the processes, and the presenters were complimented for the job well done. In conclusion, I just want, first of all, to thank you all for being with us during this discussion. And I know we went over time, but I felt we needed to go over time to address these issues, because these are day-to-day issues that we deal with in the lab. And I would also want to thank the presenters, Dr. Matsao and Prof. Mandisoza, for taking their time to make this insightful presentation, and also thank Prof. Erasmus for being mentoring the process, that it happened well. And on behalf of the African Consortium on Laboratory System Strengthening, that is the University of Zimbabwe, Department of Laboratory Diagnostic and Investigative Sciences, Cape Peninsula University of Technology, Department of Biomedical Sciences, Stellenbosch University Division of Chemical Pathology, University of Pretoria Department of Chemical Pathology, Africa Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine, and Empower School of Health. I would want to say thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and we be aware that the recordings are available, and we'll be posting some updates when we have next webinars. We are planning a next one on 29 April for the Lab Professional Week. The Lab Professional Week, we remind each other, is 25 to 29 April. So on 29 April, we will have a webinar on career opportunities in the medical laboratory profession, and we also have quality issues in the lab as well, discussed during the webinar. Thank you very much, and I would also want to thank the colleagues behind the scene who were making sure that everything happens well. Sonia, Preksha, and the team at Empower School of Health, and my colleagues here at the University of Zimbabwe, who were ensuring that the internet is tip-top during the presentation. Otherwise, let's have a good day, and let's continue to practice ethical laboratory practice in the lab. Let's have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.